Welcome back to another episode of NewsPoints on the Air, a production of the North American Division of Seventh-day Adventists. I'm your host, Milan Medley. I know more than our usual amount of time in between episodes has passed, but I promise this episode will be worth the wait. Our guest is Jaquenette Prillman, who is a nurse who contracted COVID-19 in April 2020. And this is back when our knowledge of the virus and its spread were limited in comparison to what we know and understand today. Jaquenette was also featured on May 16 in a special broadcast by the North American Division called Is the COVID-19 Vaccine Trustworthy? A biblical conversation about science. And if you missed that program, search NAD Adventist on YouTube and or Facebook to watch it in its entirety. Jaquenette is here with us today to tell us about her traumatic experience with the virus and how her faith has played a role in her long-haul recovery. Hi, Jaquenette. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Milan, for having me. It's an honor and privilege to be here today.
Let's first start off for context of who you are and your profession. How long have you been a nurse and what is your specialty?
Well, I've been a nurse for a very long time. It seems like many, many years ago. I graduated from the Catholic University of America School of Nursing. I have been a nurse for about 25 years.
Nice.
I started my career as a neonatal intensive care nurse, and I worked in different specialties of nursing. However, for the past 18 years, I have worked in utilization management as a nurse.
What does that mean, utilization management?
So what that means is I approve a patient's stay in the hospital. We deny if a patient does not meet medical necessity criteria. You know, of course, we follow the Medicare guidelines. So there are very strict guidelines for admission to the hospital. So a lot of these things are done on the back end. So basically, that's what I do. And then when a patient disagrees with a discharge date, they end up appealing the discharge. So I do a lot of work on the back end.
I see. So, okay, you're on the back end, but let's go back to March-ish 2020 when the pandemic hit the United States and then around this area. When were you asked to come from the back end? Because in knowing your story, I know that you contracted COVID-19 from work, but that's not going on in the back end. When were you asked to go from the back end, from behind the scenes, to help treat COVID-19 patients?
So in my role as a nurse, while I do not provide bedside care, the model that the organization that I work for requires that in my role, I have a face-to-face interaction with all the members that are admitted at the hospital or the facility. So in the early months of 2020, February, March, April, when there was news of COVID in the United States, I was still going to the patient's bedside and interacting with them without any PPE.
Oh, wow. Because there wasn't that knowledge then that you or the providers needed to wear all of that, the N95s and the bunny suits. Is that what it's called when it's the head to toe?
Correct.
Yeah.
There was fear of the COVID-19. There was talk of COVID-19. Patients were having symptoms of COVID-19, but we were walking around the facilities and walking into patients' rooms without any proper PPE.
Wow. So when did you suspect that you had contracted COVID-19?
I actually had to go back and look at the dates. It was, and I remember this very clearly. It was a Friday, but I had to go back and look at the date. It was Friday, April 24th.
Wow.
I had showered after work and was basically preparing to wind down before Sabbath started. After I had showered, I noticed I could not warm up. I could not get warm at all. And my daughter had gone and gotten me a heater, and we sat next to one another, just cuddled up as we both were winding down. And I had wrapped myself in several blankets with the heater next to me, and I still could not get warm. So I thought maybe it was just that I was so worn down from, a busy week that maybe my body was just not getting comfortable. I put on my earphones and started listening to 3ABN Sabbath School, but I could not stay awake, and I ended up going to bed very early that evening. Now, I went to bed that evening, and Sabbath morning, when I woke up, I was 99.9% sure that I had the COVID, but I did not want to alarm my family, especially my husband, because all we kept hearing in our home was, how careful we need to be. And he wanted to make sure that he did not catch the COVID because he thought he would surely die if he caught it. So I remember that Sabbath morning, it was April 25th, and I felt really awful. I was so cold, I could not get warm all night, and I experienced what they call bone-chilling cold. That morning, Sabbath morning, my husband got up and he made me a cup of hot tea. And when he brought that tea to me, I could not smell or taste it. So I knew then that that was a confirmation for me. What happened throughout that Sabbath, April.
And is that what you meant when you said that I was sure that I had it, but I was afraid to say it? Was it the loss of taste and smell that made you? That was like, this is it. That confirmed
it for me.
Okay.
Because even though I had, I was cold, I had the chills. I didn't know that I had the other symptoms until he brought me the cup of tea, and I could not smell or taste it. And I knew that that was, one of the symptoms that was definitely a symptom of COVID-19.
And why did your husband think if he caught it, it would be fatal for him?
So, back then, and again, I make it very clear that when I got it very early on, where really not much was known about COVID. And what was out there in the news or in the science world was that it was detrimental to certain groups or people with certain comorbidities.
High risk. Yeah.
Yes. And and my husband being African American and in a certain age range with certain comorbidities, that was, a huge concern for him.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So Sabbath morning, you had the tea, you couldn't taste and smell.
Correct. And then, throughout the Sabbath, the symptoms kept getting worse. And I know I've talked about it before where I've said that I, for one, experienced all the COVID-19 symptoms where I had the chills, I had fever that day, and all day Sabbath, my fever hovered around 101 to 103. I had the worst body ache, muscle ache. I had excruciating headache, and I'm one that really does not get headaches on a normal basis. And so this headache was something that I had never experienced before.
Wow.
And the only way for me to describe it, and I described it to many in the care team, that it felt like animals, were just chewing my brain. So that's the best way I could describe it. I also had nausea, vomiting. I had diarrhea all day, and the shortness of breath started. So, of course, loss of taste and smell, and I couldn't eat anything all day. And the shortness of breath, started. I would get up from my bed, go to the bathroom, or walk to the kitchen, and I just felt air hungry. So all those symptoms throughout the day just confirmed it.
That was all in one day?
All in one day.
Oh, my goodness. That sounds so miserable. I was thinking maybe this happened over a series of days. This is all one day. You're experiencing all these severe symptoms.
Exactly. And it got so bad that I I really was frightened for myself and, frightened of the unknown or what to expect, that I took myself to the urgent care that evening. And my husband at that time, when I told him I was going to go to the urgent care, he asked me, he said, "Do you think you have the COVID?" And the look of fear on his face. And I said, "Yes, I think I have the COVID." And we decided that, I would drive myself, but if anything, I would stop and call 911. And the reason we decided that I would drive myself was because we knew that, he would not be allowed inside and it was only going to be me. And I didn't want him waiting in the car. So I did decide to drive myself. I had taken Tylenol before I left the house and got to the urgent care. And when I got to the urgent care, I was discharged. I told them about my shortness of breath, and I kept telling them that I was air hungry. But they check your oxygen level, and at that time my oxygen level was hovering between 95 and 96, and they said I was breathing okay. I didn't have any fever, but again, I had taken Tylenol before I got to the urgent care, and they said that I looked fine, and they were not alarmed. Even though I kept telling them that I was air hungry,
meaning you couldn't breathe well, you couldn't take like deep breaths.
Correct. And I felt like I was not taking enough air. And they told me that, my vital signs were normal. And they asked to do a urine test. And I said, I am a nurse. At that time, I did say to them, I said, I am a nurse. And I know this urine test will come back contaminated. So can we not do it? But they insisted that I do the urine test. And of course, it came back positive. And they told me that I had a UTI, and that's why I was not feeling, my very best. And I was discharged a couple of hours later with a diagnosis of UTI. So when I got that diagnosis, it was about 3 a.m. that morning. And I have to say this, there was a lot of fear even in the healthcare arena. When I went to the urgent care, my vital signs were taken when I got there, but once they admitted me inside, nobody would come into my room, not even the nurses. So they came in, they hooked me up to the monitor, and of course they would look from outside the window, and they said, "Oh, your heart rate is high. Are you sure you're breathing okay?" But they didn't come and take my vital signs. They didn't take my temperature. And the only thing that they did was open the door, and they passed the urine cup for me, for them to get a sample. And when the test came back positive, I got a phone call from the doctor. They made sure that I had my cell phone on, and they said to me that the doctor will call you. So when the test came back and it was positive, I got a call from the doctor, and she said, your urine test came back positive, you have UTI, so we're discharging you. They did not come and take my vital signs. So what happened when they discharged me, and this was about 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, by now we are into Sunday morning, I was discharged home. And as I drove home, I started having chills, and I also started hallucinating. And when I started hallucinating, I was the only one on the road driving from Gaithersburg back home to Silver Spring. And as I was hallucinating, and I think I've shared this with several other churches, that, I felt this presence sitting on the front seat, and it was kind of the silhouette of my deceased mother. And she kept telling me, or so I thought in my mind, drive this car into a tree so we can be together. Drive this car into a tree so we can be together. I was so fearful that morning. I rolled my windows down, and I turned on my Gaither playlist, And what popped up was, because he lives, I can face tomorrow. And that just went on a replay the entire time I drove home from Gaithersburg to my home in Silver Spring. When I got home that morning, I've said this over and over, that I knew what I had was something just very, very different. This was very unusual. This was not flu. This was not UTI. I am not of that age where, you would have to be concerned of urosepsis. So I knew that it wasn't what they told me I had. They had done a COVID test and told me that I would get the result in 24 hours, and I would have to go home and wait for the result. So when I got home, I came downstairs. I wanted to isolate from my family, and I did. My husband came downstairs Sunday morning to check on me, and he said, "Well, what happened?" And I said, "Well, they didn't seem to think I had COVID. They said I had the UTI." And he said, "Well, that's a good thing if you don't have the COVID." And I said, "Yeah, that's a good thing." But I knew in my heart that I had COVID. But I isolated. I checked my temperature that night when I got home. It was 103.4. And mind you, they had not checked my temperature before I left. So it was 103.4. I took some Tylenol, and the next morning my husband came and we had that conversation. My condition that Sunday started worsening even more, where I could not breathe. I was so short of breath. By Sunday evening, we were frightened. I became so frightful that my husband called Pastor Esmond, and I think Pastor Esmond also sent a word to the rest of the pastors at the church.
And he's on the pastoral staff of the Emmanuel Brinklow Church in Maryland, for people who are unaware. Mm-hmm.
Correct. Pastor Esmond FaceTimed me, Pastor Esmond and his wife. And after he prayed and he interceded before God on my behalf, he said to me, "I am not a doctor, Jaquenette, but don't you think you need to get checked out?" I just could not breathe. I had become so short of breath. And I said, yes, I will. I was trying to talk, and I said, "I will, but I'm going to wait on the COVID test." Being a nurse and knowing what was happening out there, I did not want to go to the hospital. And I said I was going to try to fight this at home. So Sunday evening, it got really bad. And after Pastor Esmond prayed and he sent a message to the rest of the pastoral team, I know everyone started praying for me. Monday morning, I woke up and I got a text message and an email saying that I was SARS-CoV-19 negative. Negative. So when I got that message, I thought, okay, maybe my mind is just playing tricks on me. And for a while, I didn't say anything to my husband. I know he came downstairs and he was standing outside my door, and he kept saying to me, "Have you heard anything? Did you get your result?" And I said, no, I had to lie. And yes, I did lie. And I said, no, I didn't get my result.
Is that your phone ringing?
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
And he said to me, "Are you sure? Because if they told you that you were supposed to get your result in 24 hours, you should have gotten it by now." So by that afternoon, when he came back to check on me, I told him, I said, "Yes, I did get the result and I am negative." And he looked puzzled for a second. And he said, "Are you sure you're negative?" And I said, "Yes, I am negative." And then he stopped again and he said, "Well, if you're negative, then that must be a good thing." And I said, "Yes, it must." But again, my condition was worsening. I hadn't eaten anything. I had no taste.
If I may ask, how did they collect the sample? Did they do a nose swab?
They did, but I don't, again, I think it was so early on that I'm not even sure that people really knew how to collect the sample. And I will leave it at that.
Yeah, and they just listening to this from from where we are now in May 2021, it's just amazing how much
Has
we
changed.
know now. Yeah, it's changed. So just hearing how things were happening in March of 2020, it's just alarming. And then hearing how you were just you were seemingly deteriorating,
Correct.
with it was hard to breathe and you were just getting worse, and this fever, just a very scary time. And then to get a negative reading, yeah, that's just so interesting.
Yeah, so you can understand how puzzled we were.
Yeah.
We didn't know what to do next. And I think for me, after I got the negative test result, I was determined even more to stay at
Stay
home. And I
home.
said, okay, maybe I have the flu. Maybe it's all in my head, you know. So I'm going to fight this at home. As bad as it is, I'm going to fight this at home. I don't have the COVID. So whatever it is, I will stay at home. But I knew something was not right with me. It was, it was obvious something was not right with me. By Monday evening, I really could not breathe. My husband had to put pillows to position me to sit upright in bed.
Wow.
So that I could breathe. And, I had been hallucinating a lot, and I had been seeing different things, and I got really scared being by myself downstairs. And I would tell my husband, leave all the lights on, don't turn off any lights. So that Monday night, I sat upright. And by Tuesday morning, I wondered what happened to my husband, because by 6 a.m. he would come and check on me. And two of my girlfriends had called me by 6:15, and they asked me if, he had checked on me. And by this time I was really short of breath. And I said, no. And they said, we're going to call him to check on you. And I said, no. And I didn't realize till my husband came down at 8 o'clock that he was so concerned about me that he kept coming to check on me every half hour to an hour throughout the night, that by the time the morning came around, he was exhausted.
He was
And
asleep.
overslept,
Yeah.
But
Wow.
so he came down and he asked me, he said, did you apply lipstick? So I said, apply lipstick? And he said, yes. Did you apply lipstick? And, again, I looked at him, and he said to me, your lips are a perfect black. And I picked up my phone and I looked at my lips, and my husband his lips started quivering, his face turned red. I think he was gonna cry. And he said, I think I'll call 911 for you.
Oh my goodness.
And I said, no, don't call 911, because if you call 911, they're going to take me to the closest hospital. And I want you to promise me that you're going to take me to this particular hospital that I wanted you to take me to.
Okay.
So he promised me that he would get me to that hospital, and he helped me up the stairs. And when we got up the stairs, he carried me to the back seat of the car, of his car. And when he said that when he put me in the back seat of his car, I slumped over and became unconscious.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. And he said he broke every traffic rule that there was, driving to get me to this hospital. But Milan, when he got on New Hampshire Avenue to get on 29 and turn into the Beltway, he said, an ambulance appeared out of nowhere. The ambulance had lights and sirens on. And I would not have believed him until months after I came home from the hospital. We were out one day, and he said, I want to show you a video. And he showed me a video of this ambulance. And it was just this ambulance on the Beltway. And he said, do you remember this? And I said, no. I said, I have no recollection of this. And he said, it was the day that I took you to the hospital. And he said, look at this ambulance with lights and sirens on. He said, I followed this ambulance right to that hospital. And this ambulance guided me right to the front door of the ER. When we got there to the ER, he said he picked me up, got me out of the car, and he said to me, I need for you to walk. And you are going to walk right to this door. So he helped me to the door, and there were nurses, about 5 or 6 feet away from me. And he asked them, he said, can I come in? And they said no. But prior to me telling you about that aspect, I want to go back. That ambulance that he followed showed up right there to the ER. And he said the crew got out, the EMS crew got out. They opened the ambulance doors. There was nobody inside. He said, but there were people outside the hospital, outside the ER, in white PPE, full PPE. He said when the EMS crew got out, they went and started spraying the ambulance. And I say that God had a will for me, and he had a reason that I survived, that I believe it was angels that guided that ambulance right to the emergency room. So when I got to the emergency room, he helped me to the door, and he did ask those nurses if he could come inside. The nurses said no. And I remember him telling me, just hold on to the wall and walk right to those nurses. And I did. He put my insurance card, he put my phone, whatever else I needed in my sweater pocket. And he told me to walk on right to those nurses. And I did. When I got to them, I collapsed. They put me in a wheelchair, and one of them started taking my vital signs. And before they even finished taking the vital signs, the next thing I knew, they ran with the wheelchair to the back. And in the back, I was told that my oxygen saturation was in the mid to high 60s. And the ER physician, told me.
And what does that mean?
That means that my oxygen saturation was very low. 92 and above, 92 to 100% is considered normal. And so my oxygen level was very, very low. When the ER physician and the nurses in the back started working on me, I remember the ER physician saying that he was going to intubate me, meaning, put me on a ventilator. I remember shaking my head no. And I kept telling him I did not want to be intubated, but I wanted them to do everything for me. I wanted to be aware of what was happening. I didn't want them to paralyze me. I wanted to be aware. So he did say to me that, they were going to flood me with oxygen. And if my oxygen saturations came up, then, that would be okay. If not, he said he would have to call my husband. And by this time, I was very agitated. They were working on me. They couldn't get any lines on me. So they worked on me for quite a bit. And when I became aware of what was happening, I was on 10 liters of oxygen. They had put in lines, and they had done a COVID test. And the COVID test that they did was very different from the COVID test that I had done previously.
I'm sure.
Yes. And within an hour, I believe the test came back. And I remember the physician came in, and he told me, he said, your COVID test came back positive, and you are very, very, very ill. He said, if you would have come even half hour later, your family would have been dealing with a very different scenario.
Wow. You probably wouldn't have been able to decline getting the ventilator, at that point, if you had come later.
Correct.
Okay. So that's Tuesday after. So this is
Tuesday the 28th. Tuesday the 28th of April.
So this is 3 days or 3 days after you initially lost. You had all those symptoms.
Correct.
That Sabbath afternoon.
Correct.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. So you were admitted.
Yes.
And for how long? Okay, so he had this conversation with you. What was the next step then? Um,
So, so the next step was I was going to be admitted, and all I could say was, "Save me! I don't want to die. I don't want to die. Please save me." And the conversation was, if we are going to save you, then and you want everything done, then that includes, having to intubate you if you get to that point.
mm,
Um, and I did tell them that if I could not, give them any instructions, that they could call my husband, because he knew what my wishes were.
mm.
So I was admitted that night. Um, and after they worked on me, I actually, when I was admitted that first night, Tuesday night in the hospital, I was very comfortable. I was on oxygen. I felt like I could breathe. I actually felt pretty good, and I
Hmm.
rested that night. I was able to go to sleep until I woke up the next morning.
Mm.
When I woke up the next morning, I said to myself, I don't think I'm going to be here very long. I feel good. I think they're just going to wean the oxygen, and I should be stable enough to be discharged home. Um, of course, that was not what happened. Um, I
Okay.
remember getting a call from one of the nurses who did pretty much what I do, one of my colleagues, and she said to me, she said, "Unfortunately, I can't come to the bedside to see you, but I'm very distressed to know that you are in the hospital, and I would like to let you know that we are looking at discharging you tomorrow." And this was one of my colleagues. And I said, "I understand that you're doing your job. I mean, I do this too, and we bear difficult news to patients." And I said, "But are you sure that I am stable enough to be discharged tomorrow?" And she said, "Yes, you are. We had our rounds, and we feel that you're stable enough to be discharged tomorrow." So I said, "Okay."
Oh my goodness, I am so stressed, Jaquenette. Oh my goodness.
So I said, "Okay." And I knew a lot of the physicians that were there, and a lot of the physicians that were assigned to my care, but the chief physician was or is a friend, and he showed up. Well, he showed up in the ER just before I was going to be admitted, and he was in full PPE. And he walked into my room. I'm backing up a little bit. He walked into my room, in the ER, and he said to me, he said, "Jaquenette, do you remember me?" And I looked at him, and I could not, I could not recall. I had just been through this traumatic experience, and I was there in the ER. I looked at him, he had full PPE on, and I said, "Yes, no, I
Hmm.
don't know, And he told me who he was, but he couldn't talk because he was crying, and
Oh
and
wow.
he came to tell me that he would be the physician in charge of my care. And so the next day, he didn't show up until that afternoon. He came to my room, and I asked him, and I said, "Are you all looking?" And by this time, I was losing my voice, so everything I was saying was more, of a whisper. And I asked him, I said, "Are you discharging me tomorrow?" And he said, "Absolutely not." And he
Hmm.
said, "I have instructed them not to call you." So he said, "I will be the one who will determine when you will be discharged." So he said, let's put all that aside. He said, "I'm very concerned about, your labs." By this time, my labs were just wacky. And we talked a little bit, and I remember telling him, "Please, please, whatever you do, please just save me. Just save me. I want to live. I'm not done. Please save me." And he said, "Yes." He said, "I'm not God." He said, "But I will do everything as a physician to save you." And he left.
Mm.
And after he left, that by now we are into Wednesday.
Okay.
My condition just started going downhill after that. My fevers continued. Um, Despite the Motrin, despite the tepid baths that they did, despite any kind of intervention, they could not get my fever to go down. And when it did, it went down for maybe an hour or so, and it would come right back up.
And
So
this is the nature of the virus, because you were
correct.
saying like nothing, there was no like medicine or treatment that could reverse it at that point.
At that time, correct.
Yeah, at that time.
At that time,
Wow.
and so needless to say, they had to increase my oxygen. My oxygen kept going up and down, but starting that day, that Wednesday, my oxygen stayed at 10 liters. Um, and the headaches were so awful that they had to put me on morphine drip.
Mm.
They were concerned about blood clots, so I would get a Doppler study done every day. But Milan, I
And
have to
what's that? I'm sorry.
check if you have any clots and if the clots are traveling to your lungs.
Okay.
Because they could not wean my oxygen and I was so short of breath. So they were
Mm.
worried about that. I have to say, 6 months prior to me getting sick, I happened to have a conversation with my husband and I said, I think we are of that age where we need to take an aspirin every day, to prevent
Mm.
any kind of, cardiac issues or heart attack. Maybe we need to start taking an aspirin a day. And I had started taking aspirin, one aspirin every day. And I really think that helped me because when I was in the hospital and they were worried about blood clots, I was getting the Lovenox shot and um, they could not wean the oxygen. So they would take me for all these scans. And when my condition would deteriorate, um, they would call a rapid response. They would run with my bed, with me in the bed, to get all these scans and bring me back to the room. I
Mm-hmm.
was in a specialized COVID unit in that
Yeah.
hospital. So they tried to treat their COVID patients as much as possible with all the interventions on that unit versus having to take me, to the ICU. So they were concerned about the blood clots. My organs started shutting down.
One quick clarifier. You said you're sure that that daily aspirin that you've been taking starting 6 months prior helps. How exactly did that? How what's the correlation there between the aspirin and the blood clot issue that you were dealing with
So
or not dealing with?
right. So they say that aspirin prevents blood clots or any kind of heart attack and cardiac issues.
Okay.
So yes. So I really think that helped me. I may be wrong, but I sincerely believe that was what really helped in terms of me developing any kind of blood clots.
Wow. So then Wednesday, we're still on Wednesday when your organs start to fail?
Right, and my labs were off. I remember them coming into my room several times, drawing blood work after blood work. They told me that my kidney function, the numbers were off. And by this time, I was not eating or drinking anything. I hadn't eaten or had anything to drink since Saturday.
Ooh.
The IV fluids were going in, and that was all I could get. And I remember the nutritionist calling me on Wednesday, and she said, "I'm very concerned about you. You have not eaten since Saturday, is what I am told, and I need for you to have some protein." And the next thing I know, as I was talking to her, they came with a plate of food, and on that plate there were different kinds of meats, and I am a vegetarian.
Mm.
So of course, when I saw that plate of food, I became very nauseated and I actually vomited. And
Mm.
when I did, she asked me, she said, are you throwing up? And I said, yes, I am. And I said, I don't eat meat.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, you don't eat meat. She said, what can I get you? You really need to have some proteins. And by this time, I really didn't have any appetite. But,
Yeah.
I said to her, I said, I'd love to have some oranges and cantaloupe. And she said, okay, but that's not
It's
protein.
that
I said,
protein.
that's not protein. But I said, if I can have the oranges and cantaloupe, I think I'll be okay.
Yeah.
And do you know, I think it was my Daniel diet that did that really helped me. And when I got to the point that I could not even feed myself, the nurses would come and they would cut up the oranges, and they would cut it up in little pieces, and they would actually feed me. They would put it in my
Wow.
mouth, and they would say, just a few pieces and try to chew it up. So
Yes.
so I have to say the nurses were just incredible. And I have no doubt, I really have no doubt that the nurses that took care of me were angels,
Mm.
because those nurses knew of my faith. They knew how much I love God. And I know that they would tell me, they would walk in the room and they would tell me that they heard from some friends about my religion and who I was. They heard a lot from my husband, who I was. And they would come into the room and they would sing for me. They would
Wow.
pray, and they would tell me to fight. But this set of nurses, on that first Sabbath that I was admitted in the hospital, by this time I was really critical, and I really wasn't aware of too much. I did have some periods of mental clarity, is what I call it. And I remember that Sabbath, these two nurses walked in, and it was 8 o'clock in the morning, and they told me, "Happy Sabbath." And I couldn't really say much, and my tears were flowing. They took my vital signs, my temperature was up. And at that time, Alana, I don't know if you remember, but I had long hair, and they started brushing my hair,
Hmm.
and they started talking to me. I couldn't talk much, and when I tried to talk, they would say, "It's okay, it's okay, we'll talk, we'll talk." And my tears just kept flowing. And they said, "We know it's your Sabbath." And I think I tried to mouth, "Are you Adventist?" And they said no, they were not Adventists. One was a Baptist, I think the other one was Methodist. And they sang, they brushed my hair, they sang for me. And as they bathed me in bed, and they tried to give me tepid baths to bring my temperature down, they sang to me. And this one song that they sang, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Whom shall I fear?" And till this day, that has become one of my favorite, all-time favorite songs. And as they sang to me, they sang different songs, but that particular song, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" I
Wow.
cried the entire time. And they the way they sang, I keep saying that they were angels. They
Mm.
were angels who were present that day. And pretty much every shift, or every time that I had a new nurse, they would come and sing to me and just pray for me. And it was just incredible. It was just incredible.
Wow. So when did you start to take a turn for the better? So at this point, you'd been in the hospital, you were admitted Tuesday, right?
I
On
was
that
admitted
Tuesday.
Tuesday,
And now we're talking about that following
Saturday.
Sabbath. So after that, did things start to get, how long until things started to get better for you while you were
Things
still in the
started
hospital?
things started taking a turn for the worse throughout. I remember celebrating my birthday that following Tuesday, May the 5th, in the hospital, and that was the
Oh,
worst day. I was very critical that day. I believe things started taking a turn for the better the following Saturday,
wow.
before Mother's Day, because Sunday was going to be Mother's Day, and Saturday was when they were able to wean me down to 6 liters. And by this time, by Friday, I was asking to be discharged, and I was told that they would not discharge me. By Saturday,
Why did you want to be discharged?
well, I wanted to be home with my family. And you see, Milan, I had plenty of time to think of a lot of things. You're laying
Mm.
in bed all day and all night. hallucinating, in and out of consciousness. And when there was some period of mental clarity, I didn't know whether I was gonna live or die, and I wanted to be close to my family, even if it meant being able to just see them one more time from a distance, you know. And my husband, on the other hand, was also dealing with his own roller coaster of emotions, as he would later tell me. He would call the hospital in the morning and they would tell him, oh, she's doing good. And then by 11 a.m. or so, they would say, she's taken a turn for the worse. She's going downhill. By 2 p.m., he would call, or they would call him, and they would say, you know, she's still not stable. And then by 6 p.m., it would be, oh, yes, she's improving. And by midnight, it would be, oh, we've stabilized her. And then he would call again at 6 a.m., and it would be like, she's crashing. We can't talk right now. We'll call you.
And he can't come in person at all.
No. Yeah. And it just continued that way every day. And on my birthday, May 5th, when I was barely able to move, I really was deathly ill. I remember at 7 a.m., one of the nurses, coming in, she brought me a bouquet of flowers, and she said to me, guess who delivered them? And, again, by this time I wasn't speaking, and I looked at her, my tears were flowing, and she said, your husband, these flowers are from your husband, and he told me to wish you a happy birthday. And, I could not talk. So I think I mouthed, something to, is he here? And she said to me, she said, yes, he was here. I went downstairs to, get these flowers from him. And it was like he almost followed me, and I told him he couldn't follow me. And she said to me, if you want to see your husband again, and if you want to see your family, you have to fight. And my husband would also text and call, and he would say, if you get strong enough to be discharged, I want you home. I'll take care of you. I want you home. So for me, it was the longing of being around, people that you love, around your loved ones, that really made me decide that I wanted to get out of the hospital.
Wow. Okay. So how many days in total were you in the hospital before you were discharged? Because you were discharged on Mother's Day, right?
So that was almost 2 weeks.
Okay. 2
weeks.
So you asked to be discharged on Mother's Day, and you were sent home with oxygen, correct?
I was sent home on 6 liters of oxygen, and I did sign myself against medical advice.
Okay. So you get home. And I'm having trouble imagining or thinking what liters of oxygen look like. I know what the oxygen tanks, is that what it is when you see those tanks that sometimes people wheel, or no?
Right. So you have the big concentrator that they deliver to the home, and then you have the portable tanks that they, that you use when you travel around. So 6 liters. Usually they send patients home on 2, 3, 4 liters at the most, but I was on 6 liters of oxygen.
Wow,
so
you were maxed out.
Right. They like to wean the oxygen down to at least 2, at the most maybe 3 or 4 liters before a patient is discharged.
Wow. And then how long were you using those 6 liters?
So I was using the 6 liters for several weeks, and over I actually, I'll be honest with you, I tried to wean myself off. So I would remove the nasal cannula, and I would become very short of breath. So immediately I would put the oxygen back on, and I knew that it was not time for me to wean myself. So I was on 6 liters of oxygen for several weeks, and then I weaned myself down to 4 liters for quite a while. So I was on oxygen for a couple months. And they call us long haulers. So my recovery was initially, it was pretty slow. I was on the oxygen for several months. Yes.
Wow. Okay. This is a lot.
It is. It is.
That's okay. So for a lot of months. So you have not. When did you return to work, or were you expected? So what's going on on the work side, do you know if any of your other colleagues had also contracted COVID-19?
I found out later that some others had also contracted COVID-19, and I also have some colleagues who passed away
Oh my
from
goodness.
COVID-19. So I consider myself very blessed, and I say that because and I know I repeat myself when I say that God is not done with me, and I truly believe that, and I believe that there is a reason that um, I am where I am today. And so I am so grateful. Um, so in regards to my recovery,
Hmm.
I was home for a couple of months. I even worked from home with oxygen on. I could not really get on the phone talking to my patients for as long as I wanted to because I would get very short of breath. So I had a lot of wonderful colleagues who supported me and did part of my work, but I did return to work with the oxygen on.
Wow. Okay. So in the midst of all of this, um, you're fighting for your life. Your husband is going through the unimaginable, not being able to see you, only able to get updates from your providers. But you've told me you had people who, while you were going through this, doubted that you had COVID-19. They knew you were sick, but doubted the disease, the virus as a whole, but just thought you were very sick, but didn't have COVID-19. Can you describe what was that like when people in your own community doubted what you were experiencing?
Well, I would say that there are people who then and even now, consider COVID a hoax. And so
Mhm.
I knew of people, and I even had friends, and I'm talking about Adventist friends that I knew who were of that mindset. So I had a lot of people that initially did not reach out to me. Some still do not acknowledge my illness or the severity of it,
To this
while
day.
others till this day,
Mm.
while there have been others that have called, texted, and I've had a few that have even been brave enough to visit me, but in a
Mm.
very generic manner.
Yeah.
I, on the other hand, am very vocal and quite transparent about my experience.
Wow. So you were also, an aside, supported by a network of Jewish healthcare providers. Um, can you also talk about how this other community, how you were embraced and supported and cared for by another set of people whom you had a relationship with?
Well, I have done work with various Jewish organizations, especially in the field of hospice care in Montgomery County. So I have to say that because of my work with the different organizations, you know, um, they had been extremely supportive in different ways, pretty much making sure that my health, um, overall care and wellness, was a priority in my recovery. So I have to say that in regards to the aftercare, I was blessed than most um, to have had that kind of support.
Yeah. And how did you, just briefly, how did you get into hospice care aside from your what you did for
So,
normal?
yeah. So, I got into it to honor my mother, who
Mm,
had passed away several years ago, and she was in hospice care for about almost 4 or 5 years.
mm.
And I was able to witness the compassion and the care that hospice provided. And I pretty much went into um, doing what I do with the community in her honor.
Got it. Wow. Wow. So you've already spoken of how you reached out to your local pastor and you knew like your local church family had been praying for you, but your relationship with the Adventist church hadn't always been in that manner as you described to me, where you would, willfully reach out or lovingly embrace in a local church community. Can you describe how that perspective changed? I know there was like an arc, a period of several years in your life where you were not involved with the Adventist church. Can you briefly talk about how that shift happened for you?
So, I really want to put out there, Milan, that, during my illness, I, along with my family, were very blessed to be part of a wonderful, wonderful church family in Emmanuel Brinklow Seventh-day Adventist Church. I have to say, when the news of my illness spread, the church family just came through in terms of prayer and just supporting my family. And myself. So I have to say that we were really humbled, to witness the genuine concern from the church family. But going back to your question,
Mhm.
I grew up a third generation Adventist, and Adventist and Adventism, was always ingrained in me. I never doubted the beliefs or doctrines of the church. The seventh day Sabbath um, and is, and always
Mhm.
will be for me, pretty much. My perspective of Adventism, I have to say, was more of a disappointment in what I experienced, considering the tremendous focus of the church, on winning souls to Christ and practicing what Jesus taught and being more like Jesus. The
Mm.
practicality of all that hit me hard when I met my husband about 30 years ago. Um, I had decided to bring him to church, uh, bring this unbeliever, a non Adventist. My husband was Baptist at that time. My husband is also African American. Growing up, I heard many sermons preached on 2 Corinthians 6:14, where Paul states, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. And do you
Mm.
know, I was lectured on, based on that verse, by so many family, friends, and people in the church. Um, and I will have to say that all it took was that one Sabbath of bringing my unbeliever husband to church. Um, he wasn't my husband at that time. So I physically stopped attending church for almost 10 years. But during that time, I did not abandon the faith that I had in Adventism. I just stopped going to church.
Hmm.
But I think that
Well,
is a story for another podcast.
yeah. Well, and to just like briefly, because you mentioned, how yes, he was a Baptist, but you mentioned that he's African American. And for those who may be listening to this and don't see this, you are Indian American. So bringing in a Black American
Correct.
to it, I'm assuming this was a majority Indian American
Correct.
congregation. Can you like just briefly describe like what was it about bringing a Black American with you that caused that to stand out?
When you talk about the societal acceptance, and again, I think the mindset has changed, or maybe it hasn't. I don't know. I can't speak to that. But back then, I was brought up, and if you want me to be honest, I will say it. I was brought up with the mindset of white is right, and you will bring home an Indian or a white.
Hmm.
So I think it was a shocker for a lot of the people in the Indian community who knew me, who knew my family, um, to bring home an African American gentleman. And I think in time, the family and friends got to know my husband for the person he was or he is. And I think that, and I use this word mentality, changed.
Mm-hmm.
But I was so young at that time when I met my husband. I was 18, my husband was 31. And for a young uh, girl who grew up in the faith, who grew up in the church, um, we talk about wanting to go to heaven, and in heaven there is no color, and in heaven we all are going to live like one big family with God. And I questioned that a lot, that if we cannot live like one big happy family here on this earth, and we cannot be accepting of one another, how are we going to do that in heaven? So
Hmm.
I think that bothered me for a very long time.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Your story is just incredible. So even though you had stopped attending church, like you said, you hadn't lost the faith. I just want to know what brought you back around, back into the Adventist church. Who or what influenced that for you and your husband?
Well, I had a very dear friend that we worked together in the NICU, who also happened to be Adventist, and she knew of my story, and I knew of her story, and she had been through different challenges in her life, and just like me, she never lost faith in the church, and she faithfully kept going to church. And she would tell me, why don't you come back to church? Why don't you come to my church? And at that time, she invited me to come to Emmanuel Brinklow. And I don't know why, but I did
Mhm.
not accept her invitation. I ended up going to CPC. And my husband and I went to
That's
CPC.
Community Praise Center in
Correct.
Northern Virginia.
Right.
Hmm.
Just, thinking nobody's going to know us, and we're just going to, sneak in and out. And, um, decided to go to CPC. And before I went to church that Sabbath, I remember talking to God, and I said, Lord, if you want me to return back to church, and if you really are God, I've never doubted you, and I don't want to doubt you. But if you really want me to come back to church, then let them sing nearer, my God, to thee. And wouldn't you know it, Milan, as my husband and I got out of the car and we were walking into the church, I remember the choir was standing up and the church was packed, and they were singing, Nearer, my God, to thee.
Wow. Wow.
And
Wow.
that did it for me.
That did it. That did
That,
it. Wow.
that did it.
So to start to wrap this up, and you've mentioned this throughout, but I just want to ask this directly about the role your faith played throughout this year or more, a year plus of your recovery. I'm curious to know, even with the nurses singing, and you said you felt the presence of, them as angels and, all this. Did you ever lose faith? Did you ever want to give up? And if you had those moments, how did you lean on your faith to propel you and to keep you as you fought for your life?
Well, I was so ill, and physically, yes, I wanted to. It got to the point that I did want to die. But I will say this to you, um, I love the Lord. And throughout my illness, even though I felt there were times that life was fading from me, um, just like the thief who hung by Jesus' side, I wanted to be
Mhm,
sure, that I would be with Jesus in paradise.
mhm.
Through
Yeah.
it all, it was all about, not my will, but thine be done, pretty much. Um, it was because of this faith that I had in God, um, you know, that you alone are God, that I believe that you alone are God, that if my time on this earth was going to end, then it was his will. And if it was his will that he allowed me to live, then he's not done with my life on this earth. So I
Mm,
was also very blessed to have had a mother who lived her life, trusting God. And when you live right and do his will, God will never leave you. And you know, if you walk the dark valley, he will be right there beside you if you trust in him. So for me, you know, I never lost that faith, and I was prepared and I was at peace either way.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing your profound and powerful story. Is there anything else you would like to add to this? I mean, you've already shared so much and shared so richly and transparently. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I would just say, you know, that with so much going on in this world, God is still faithful. There is so much hurt, sadness, grief with the pandemic and other events of the last year. But I will say, God knows how much each of us can bear. Even when we feel He is quiet, He is right there. So I would say, trust Him.
Amen. What better note to end on? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Milan.
Thank you for listening and watching this episode of NewsPoints on the Air, a production of the North American Division of Seventh-day Adventists. This program is edited, produced, and hosted by me, Milan Medley. The executive producers are Dan Weber, Julio Munoz, and Kimberly Moran. Graphics are by Jonathan LaPointe. Listen and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Leave 5-star ratings and write a glowing review. Speaking of subscribe, you must subscribe to NewsPoints. It's our weekly digital newsletter, and it's award-winning, if I may add, award-winning by the Associated Church Press. It's your one-stop shop for keeping up with the North American Division. Simply go to nadadventist.org, then click on News. If you need to reach me, send an email to ontheair@nadadventist.org. That's ontheair@nadadventist.org. Thanks for checking out this episode. We'll see you next time.